Remember all that stuff I said at the start of the Donkey Kong Country episode about how the 90s was a golden age for 2D platform games? Well, I wish I hadn't said that, because then I'd have a clever way of opening this episode. I also wish I hadn't killed, cooked and eaten that Rare employee, but it's the only safe way to dispose of a body. But anyway, let's conclude our unintentional trilogy of platform game episodes with a look at some of the most memorable and well-regarded 2D platform games of the 90s. Also Superfrog. Do you remember Superfrog? No? Probably not, thought not. Oh well, let's hit the ground running.
Well, I say running, I really mean listless walking and some problem solving, as our first game is Another World, or Out of This World if you're an American.
See? Short straw.
Another World is a revolutionary platform game where the player, that's you, controls the preposterously named Lester Knight Shakin, a human scientist who inadvertently finds himself transported to another world, which is appropriate considering that's the name of the game and all. It was developed almost entirely by Delphine Software's Eric Chahi, right down to the original cover art for the game's box. The game is animated using vector graphics, something Chahi did after being impressed by the animation in the Amiga version of Don Bluth's Dragon's Lair.
Which is a game with a few notorious ports of its own, he said, throwing a bone to the literally dozens of people emailing asking me to look at that bloody game.
Like all of history's greatest games, Another World originated on the Amiga and from there was ported to a number of systems including the Super Nintendo, the Sega Genesis and the Apple IIgs. Pretty much every port of the game includes additional enemies and an extra level, added by Chahi when critics of the Amiga version said it was too short. A handful of console ports featured incidental music and a Star Wars-style scrolly text prologue presented as one of Lester Knight Shawshank's diary entries, which isn't so much a prologue as it is a description of stuff that happens during the game. The best port of the game is the anniversary re-release for the PC and Mac, which is available on Steam and Good Old Games and includes significantly updated graphics and a wealth of bonus content, but probably the most notable port is the Sega CD version.
Actually, that's not true. There's a 3DO version, but I don't have a 3DO, so you're going to have to make do with sloppy seconds.
As well as featuring enhanced audio, the Sega CD version also came bundled with an exclusive sequel, Heart of the Alien, which saw the player taking control of the alien buddy who helped Lester Nightingale Fitkin out during the course of the first game.
Heart of the Alien counterbalances the brilliant design and stunning visuals of the original by being more or less terrible from start to finish, and it even manages to ruin the ending of the original by showing Lester M. Night Shyamalan being electrocuted, killed, and later cremated. So, hooray for closure.
Another World was a direct inspiration for the next game on our list, Flashback, which was also developed by Delphine Software. You play as a futuristic amnesiac named Conrad as he attempts to more or less single-handedly bring an end to an invasion of the Body Snatcher-style alien incursion. Flashback has a similar style of animation to Another World for cutscenes, but in terms of flavour, the game itself has much more in common with Prince of Persia. Flashback is often mistaken for a sequel to Another World, but it isn't, so stop being so thick.
Flashback was ported to literally every platform ever, but once again it's the Sega CD version I'm going to look at, because I bought this bloody stupid accessory, and I'll be damned if I'm going to let it sit in a cupboard gathering dust.
The Sega CD version features enhanced audio, in-game music, and actually features voice acting for all of the in-game dialogue, which is pretty neat, but Delphine also made the bizarre decision to redo all of the cutscenes in really bad 90s era CG. In doing so, they glossed over a few plot points and missed a lot of minor details. The broad strokes of the plot are there, but enough smaller details are missing entirely that the experience is somewhat cheapened.
Of course, you can still play Flashback on your modern state-of-the-art computer, as well as on some games consoles like the PSP or the Wii, thanks to a game engine recreation called Reminiscence, which takes the data files from the DOS version and reinterprets them for use under modern operating systems. And if you like, if you've got the files handy, it'll even let you use the music from the Amiga version, as well as the voiceover files from the Sega CD version. If you want to play Flashback, and you do want to play Flashback, this is the best way of doing it.
There's also a ROM out there for a cancelled Game Boy Advance sequel-cum-remake called Flashback Legends, which has almost nothing in common with the original and is, broadly speaking, shit. It was never released as Delphine Software went bust.
And how could that happen to a company that puts out two seminal games like Another World and Flashback a year apart? Well, I'll tell you how. 2 years after Flashback, they put out another title, you might be familiar with it, Shaq Fu. No company could survive that.
But enough realism, onto more cartoony fare, starting with Superfrog, a 1993 Amiga platformer from Worms developers Team 17. Often overlooked, Superfrog could be described as a perfect blend of the Fast and Furious style of Sonic the Hedgehog with a more considered approach of Super Mario Bros. It's cute, it's fun, it's cuddly, and it has a wonderful difficulty curve.
Anyone who's even remotely interested in 2D platformers should spend some time with Superfrog. In fact, I'm of the opinion that anyone who wants to make a 2D platformer should be forced to sit down and play the game from start to finish. Twice.
Superfrog developed something of a cult following on the Amiga, a following which only grew when the game was ported to the PC the following year. The port was handled by one man, Arden Aspinall, who did a pretty decent job of translating the game to the PC. There are some minor differences, specifically the HUD is different, the controls are redesigned for a 2-button joypad instead of a 1-button joystick, and the game's single scrolling shoot-'em-up level is missing. It's also much harder, owing to the fact that the physics are notably different, and Superfrog's hitbox is a little bit bigger, meaning he's more likely to get hit by enemies and harmful objects.
The game's two main power-ups don't work in quite the same way in the DOS version as they do in the original Amiga version. For instance, one of the power-ups is a little set of white wings that when you collect it, allow Superfrog to flap his cape and slow his descent, or glide for a little while when he's jumping. Kind of like the raccoon tail in Super Mario Bros. 3, the way that you mash it when you're in a descent. It slows you down a little bit. It's kind of like that. The problem is, on the MS-DOS version, it hasn't been implemented very well, which renders a lot of the jumps, particularly jumps later on in the game that require the power-up, preposterously difficult to do, which makes it even harder to finish the DOS version of the game.
The PC version of Superfrog is up on Good Old Games for a mere $6, and despite its flaws, it's worth every penny. In fact, it's worth several more pennies if we're being completely honest, but $6 is a pretty decent price point for a passable port of one of the greatest platform games ever made, so you should jump on it, if you'll pardon the pun.
Go buy it. Like now, like right now. I will stop talking and you can go to Good Old Games, it's GOG.com in case you want, GOG.com, give them your money, download the game. I'll wait here. I'll wait, it's cool, I'll wait. Go! On the second thought, let's not wait for people to buy Superfrog. It is a silly idea.
On to our final game then, James Pond 2, Codename RoboCod, a game that can't seem to decide which movie franchise it wants to make fun of. But it's a cracking little game that has you exploring large levels, rescuing British biscuit mascots, and ultimately saving Christmas, just like the real RoboCop and/or James Bond.
I loved this game as a kid, but it tends to divide people. Either you loved it, or you hated it. Or you thought it was okay. I recently found out that one of my favourite game journalists from the 90s thought this game was overrated, so naturally I've since written him off as a hack, and I send him an invective-filled email every few days just to remind him that he's wrong and that I'm better than he is.
James Pond 2 was released in 1991 for a number of systems, including the Amiga, the CD32, the Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis, but it found a second life when it was re-released for the Game Boy Advance and PlayStation 1 in 2003. There are a number of minor changes in this version, notably the penguins have been replaced by Santa's elves, and the quality of the graphics has been punched up some, but there is one rather significant change. The levels are entirely different, redesigned from scratch for some reason, I suppose.
This is essentially an entirely new game, and you're either going to be upset that it's not the original Amiga version containing all of the original levels, or excited that it's essentially an expansion pack. It's James Pond 2, but there's more of it. It's brand new, that's exciting. But we still don't know why they made an entirely different set of levels. Did they not have the rights to the original levels? Did they just want to surreptitiously sneak out a pseudo-sequel? We don't know. And we'll never know, because everyone who worked on this version of the game is dead. That's not true. Made it up. Shouldn't have done. Sorry.
This version of the game would later go on to be released for the Nintendo DS and, for some reason, the PlayStation 2, and you can actually buy it as a PlayStation 3 title on the PlayStation Network if you're in Europe. The PSN and PS2 versions are identical to the PS1 version in literally every regard, which makes it, I don't know, a thing that exists.
Look, I'm going to be honest, I'm getting kind of tired. It took a lot of energy to make this video and a lot of time, and there's a lot of this video, and I'm just kind of drained right now, emotionally. So if you don't mind, I'm just gonna lie down here.